Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin Perek Revi, the fourth Perek in Hilchos Gerushin, the laws of divorce, in the Rambam Sefer Noshim in the book of women, where the Rambam continues the theme of the previous Perek, where he's delineating the 10 different biblical requirements for a valid get, a divorce document, which he spoke about regarding the writing of the get. It has to be Lishma for her name and for his name, and with that we continue with regarding the writing of the get. Halacha Aleph, the Rambam opens up regarding the actual substances that can be used for the document itself, as the Rambam says. In Kaisnes Aget, you cannot write the divorce document, only if it's something that the remnant will remain, meaning that it's going to be recognizable. Could go in, for example, Dyoy is if you write with ink, the Sikra, which is some type of like a red clay, which the Rambam explains in his Pirush Mishnayos and Megillah. It's like a rock that they would use to dye a red type of a dye. And the Koimais, which is a sap from a tree, like a gummy, which they used to use in the olden times for like a type of a glue or as a writing, as the Rambam explains in his Pirush Mishnayos and Gittin, that's a type of dust which blackens, or the kankantim, type of like a copper sulfate. Okay, it's been things like that which they make a permanent mark, like the way ink does. But if you write with something that doesn't last, for example, mashkin, liquids, beverages, or maybe Paris, or fruit juice, and things like that. Although it makes a mark for a moment, but then it disappears. It's not so strong. In the get, that's not going to be a valid get. Now, let's say he writes with lead, which either means with lead itself, or the liquid from that, or bishchar, or the stylus, which is some type of a metal thing that you cut into the parchment, or b'shichor, or with charcoal. Kosher, these things are valid, but you don't initially write with them because they don't last as strong as dye and the sikr and all those other things. So therefore, it is valid, but initially one should use the items the Rambam mentioned before. Now, halacha beis. One initially could use golnut juice to write al gabe hanyar, if it's on paper, piece of parchment, or the hide of an animal, which is that's the parchment or paper that's made from papyrus. Okay, it's been things like that. And those are things you could write on if you're using golnut juice. But you cannot write with golnut juice, which that's like a type of an ink, if it's on a scroll that itself was worked through with afatzim, with golnut juice itself. In contrast, let's say you have a piece of hide, which is what the parchment is made from, if it's not totally worked out. And the reason why you can't write on the scroll that was totally worked out with golnuts itself, because the appearance of the parchment is the same appearance as the lettering itself, because that's golnut juice, and this parchment was worked through the process of turning into the parchment with golnuts itself. And if one did write with golnut juice on this hide that was worked through with golnuts, and again, it's not a valid get. Anything like that, which is not going to be recognizable, is not a valid writing. Now, however, says Ram, you could write on anything, which one initially should not have benefit from this, but in regards to laws of Gittin, even if something forbidden to have benefit, it's still a valid get. And you can even write on something that could be forged, but that's as long as that he gives it to her in front of witnesses who see what's given over, so they see what is, so they know what happened as it was happening. So even though it could be forged, but they don't go based on what's written inside, they see what it is as it's given over. As Ram explains, halacha gimel ketzad. How so? I say it could be written ala niyar hamachik, on a piece of paper that was erased, meaning someone had been written, then erased. So though the husband could subsequently erase it until the place of where the witnesses sign, he could write on it whatever stipulation he wants to, and it's not going to be recognizable that it's a fraud, that he forged anything, and because the witnesses are quote unquote going to be signed on whatever that is, even though it's going to be kosher, because since you're giving it over in front of witnesses, so there's no later that he's going to change anything. It doesn't make a difference. They saw what they saw when this being given over. So to ala diftera. Diftera is hide that wasn't totally turned into that parchment so well, meaning you did what's called salting and you did it with flour, but you didn't do afatzim with the golnuts. So their erasing is not so recognizable, because Rashi says when the parchment has been worked through in its tanning process with the afatzim, with the golnuts, so it has a black coloring. So you can't forge it anymore, because if you're going to scrape it off, the hide's going to become white and you can recognize where the guy erased. But if it's not mu'ufit, then it's white and you don't recognize when it's erased. But even so, you could write on the erased paper, or on this diftera, v'alacheres, or on the earthenware shard, v'al'oln, or on leaves, v'al yodah shel or on the hand of a slave, meaning all these things doesn't make a difference what you're writing on, v'al keren shel parah, or the horn of a cow, And the Rambam just points out, but if you write on the hand of the slave or the horn of the cow, you have to give her the slave and the cow, because, as we had mentioned in Perek Aleph, you can't cut it off in between, because nothing could be in between the writing and the giving. Or like we said, or on the erased paper, or on this diphthera, which is parchment that's not fully worked through, or things like that. As long as you're giving it in front of witnesses, which that's what's called in halacha the edim misira. Those are the ones who read it before it's given over to the woman when she comes to marry. So then she has to bring those witnesses, and if they know that he forged anything, we're not relying on the witnesses that are signed inside, because they're not coming in front of us because we have the witnesses signed on it. So we're not going to recognize if there's any fraud. But if there's edim misira, so therefore it's going to be valid, because we don't care that maybe he changed anything, because we're not going based on what's written inside. We're going based on what the witnesses are going to tell us. Halacha dalt. Let's say how you get chakuk al yodeh shel eved b'kseves kaka. Let's say the get was actually carved into the hand of the slave with a tattoo. Now, and now the woman was producing this slave, coming and saying, "Look, my husband divorced me. Look at this slave that he gave me with the get on him." And so the witness's signature was also carved out with a tattooed into his arm. So he's a magresha, so she's divorced, as we said in the previous halacha. And even though she doesn't have edim misir, witnesses that show that the husband gave this slave with the get written on him to the woman, shari ein yochel is daif, because this cannot be forged, because it's tattooed into his arm. Obviously you can't erase it, so this was a get written, and she has the get, so it's like edich sima, which are valid, without any option of fraud. Now, even if this Eved was known to be, the slave was known to be the slave of the husband, so not only in a situation where we don't know it to be his, that we say she's divorced, even if we know that this slave was his, where she has no chazakas in the slave, even so she can be divorced at least in a doubtful way. Because the get the divorce document that's tattooed into his hand, and she's producing the slave, she says, this slave was given over to me in front of witnesses, they're just not here. Now, if it's true what she's saying, that it was given over with edim misira, most definitely she would be divorced. But if it was without edim misira, she wouldn't be divorced at all, because since she doesn't have, as Rambam is going to end off, she has no chazaka in the eved, so it was never given to her. So it's like as if he tells her that this is your get, but the paper's mine, which is not divorced. Now, but she's claiming that it was given over to me in front of witnesses, so that's going to already be doubtful if she's divorced. Maybe it's true that there were witnesses, and then it's a valid get. So Hariz Yosef and Magresh, so this is a doubt if she's divorced. We don't know, the edim misira not here. And the reason is because Shema may ask maybe, what do you mean, she has the Eved. He wrote the get, how does she have the Eved? Maybe he went by himself. Which that's a klal, a general rule that goyders, which are movable items like an animal or like a slave, you don't have a chazaka, usually what's called chazaka, whatever's in your possession, we presume it's yours. But these things, we don't presume it, because they could have gone by themselves, and therefore it's not a proof that she has it, that it was given from the husband to her, and therefore she's only suffik megureshes, because maybe the edim misir, maybe not, and therefore it's only doubtful megureshes. Halacha hey. Let's say the get, the divorce document was carved out in a tablet. And the witnesses also were carved out in this tablet. And she's producing and she's saying, my husband used this to divorce me. So even though we presumed that this tablet was always hers, so she could have done it. She's divorced. As the Ram had explained in the previous halacha, the woman herself could write the get, and she was marking it to her husband to fulfill that that he's giving her from his own. Because again, if she wouldn't be marking it to him, how could he divorce her with her own things? He didn't give her anything. But yeah, the fact that she wrote it and it was hers, that doesn't make a difference. She could have written it, given it to her husband, and he would give it to her. And the reason is because the validation of the get is only with its signatures, the witnesses that are signed on it. And most definitely, they would be particular to make sure that the parchment or whatever the tablet was, that she gave it to him before it was written. And that's im ein shomei d'mesir. That's if there's no witnesses who saw it being given over. Because if the witnesses saw it being given over, so for sure they would know if it was being if she acquired it to him or not. So saying even though there's no edim misira, but it's still valid because the witnesses signed it. Well, the witnesses would not sign unless we knew from that she had given it to the husband. If she gave it to the husband, and here she's producing it, then we presume that she gave it to him because the witnesses signed, and therefore it's a valid get. Halacha vav. Continue on this theme of chakika. Let's say the get was carved out on a tablet, or on a rock, or on a piece of metal. So it depends how it's written. If the means the thighs, but the actual body of the letters were what's dug in, that's what was carved out. So kasher, that's valid. That's considered writing. Harema, as the Rambam brings a pasuk in Yirmiyah, ksuva be'ed brazil. It's written with an iron pen. That means carving out. That he dug it out, and you see that a writing that's with submerging, which is a digging, is considered writing. So too, if you dug out the letters themselves from behind the plate. So though actually when you're writing from behind, you're actually writing the opposite way, but when it's protruding out like regular letters, until it sticks out in the front of the plate. That's also considered writing. But what doesn't work is let's say they carved out in the middle of the letter, meaning the internal part was what was pushed in. Until you see that the letter is higher from either side because you pushed inside the letter and outside the letter so that the actual letter is left standing. The way they write on the golden coins. By the way, the lettering sticks out, but the way they produce it is they didn't actually make it. They push away everything else, and that's left standing. That's not a valid get. That's not writing. You didn't write actual letters. It's the last men standing, where the letters are just remaining because you pushed everything else away. That's not going to be valid as considered as writing because you didn't do an action in the letters itself. And you have to, b'chasavla has to, like the pasuk says, you have to actually write it. Halacha zayin. Hamakureya al ha'or. If someone cuts out, it's like etching on the leather, on the hide, on the parchment, tavnis ksav, a form of a lettering. Or he sketches like a rishima, an appearance on the leather, the form of a letter. So though just sketching on the leather doesn't last, because it could dry and you could just remove it from the leather, Harizah Kasha is still going to be valid because since this rishima would last on something else, here, just because it happens to be leather, it's not going to last, but still considered valid writing, and therefore it's going to be considered valid. Now, in the middle of this halacha, the Rambam continues on regarding the writing of the get and its meaning regarding the lettering and regarding the language. Says the Rambam, you could write the get with any type of lettering, and any language. In get, said the get was written with any language, and the witnesses they signed with some other lettering, kasha is going to be valid. Two independent entities. But that is at least at least if the witnesses recognize the language of the writing of the get, and maksiva, not only the language, but also the letters, which actually the Mefarshim point out, although in Parak Alf the Rambam had said that if the witnesses don't know how to read, they read in front of them and they sign, but as long as sheikyu loshna get, that sounds like they don't have to recognize the writing, letters, only the language. Here the Mefarshim explains is different because since the witnesses are signing with a different lettering, so it's not enough just that they could read it, it has to be that they have to understand the actual letters itself, so they have to understand the language and the letters itself. Continuing now with regarding the witnesses, let's say one of the witnesses, he signed with one type of lettering, and the other witness, some other language or some other lettering, kasha is going to be valid. Each are independent witnesses. But what is different is if let's say part of the get itself was written in one language, and part of another language, that puzzle is going to be invalid. And the reason for that is because the get is one entity. So you have to be that there's no changes in the get itself. But regarding the signing of the witnesses, that could be in two different languages because each witness is his own, as the Rabbi points out in the Ha-Sagas. Now, halacha test. Kol lashon sheikasabah get. So any language that you're going to write, we said you can use any language that you're going to use to write the get. So the scribe has to be careful with the wording of the get, that the understanding of the words should not have two different meanings. Until the one who's reading could say, he says, wait a second, what does this mean? Maybe this is his intent. That doesn't sound like it's talking about divorce. Maybe no, maybe it means something else. That it does mean divorce. It shouldn't be like that. It has to be words that there's no doubt regarding the understanding of the wording. It has to be clear that the idea means to say that this man is divorcing this woman and he's sending her away. It also has to be not only the language, the wording, but the lettering. It has to be very clear with the lettering that they should write. Until the children will know how to read it. That they recognize this lettering. We're talking about kids that are not super smart. And the gear says meaning and not foolish children. Medium type children that they could discern, they could read it, they could tell what the lettering means. Which a cute vignette, as someone told me recently, says that there was a boy in shul, this is actually a Ma'aser Shalaya, where he came home so proud and he told his mother, he says, wow, all the great rabbis, all that Moirim, all the Gedolim, they're all there, and they had a question with the Sefer Torah, and guess they came over to me to ask me what was the halacha, how could I read it? But again, that's the halacha, that you have to have a child, because a child doesn't have any bias regarding when they're reading it, they're just going to read it as it is, so it has to be clear enough that the child will be able to recognize it. As the Rambam says, "V'li'ik sabukum," and the lettering cannot be crooked, mavulvul, or incoherent, shemetidma ois la'ois, because maybe the letter's going to look like a different letter, and it's going to have a different meaning, so you got to be careful how you write the letters, that it's precise, clear reading. Now, halach yirav, but let's say hayu by mishmosh ne'inyanim, not like the way we said. Let's say the words could have two different meanings. Oh, maybe, yeah, the way he wrote it was crooked, sloppy, incoherent. Until you could read it, you're not sure, it's hard to tell. Maybe it meant something else. So says Ram, since ultimately the purpose of this is being read for divorce, and there's also, it sounds like that's for divorce. So I raise a puzzle, meaning, it sounds like he's saying that that's why it should be kosher. As the Rambam always says, he says himself, the word puzzle means that's only rabbinically problematic, meaning biblically it's not going to be invalid. But rabbinically, it's going to be puzzle again because it wasn't written in the appropriate way of how the get should be written. But again, biblically, it's still going to be a valid get. Now the Rambam moves on here regarding the actual text of the get and the precision in the text itself. As the Rambam says, Kvar nagu kol am Yisrael, it's already been the custom from all the Jewish people, lichtav I get lashon Aram. It's right to get in Aramaic. And in the following text, although we said before, you can write in any language, even initially. But this is the text of the get that has been accepted practice. Halacha Yud Beis. B'kach b'Shabbos, this is a sample get. In this in this day of the week, b'kach li'erech pleni, in this day of this month, b'shnas kach b'kach li'tziri, in this year and year of since creation of the world, or from the counting of documentation, which goes according to, as Ram said in Perek Aleph, from Alexander the Great, which is when they started counting those years of documentation. According to the counting that how they date in this place over here, but in that place, which they named the place. How me, this person, the son of this person, from this place, and all of the names and all of the nicknames that I have, and that my father has, and the place that I has, and the place that my father is from. She says, I want with my own desire, without being forced, I'm dismissing, and releasing, and I'm divorcing you to yourself. And plainness, you, this woman, the daughter of that man, from that place, and any other name and any other nickname that you have, and to your father and to your place, meaning whatever nicknames they have and names they have, and the place of your father. The Havis intercede that you were my wife up until now, and now I'm dismissing you, releasing you, and divorcing you. This Yehivin Rasha, now that you have permission and all rights to go ahead and get married, to any man that you want, and no man's going to protest from you from here on, and you're permitted to every single person. And this should be from me to you a bill of divorce, beget beturin, and the document of dismissal, bigar shavukin, and a letter of release. Kedas Moshe Yisrael, like the faith of Moshe and the Jewish people. Now the Rambam says, and the witnesses they sign on the bottom, like we had explained in Perek Aleph Halachat as well. Pliny ben Pliny 8, this man, the son of this man, witness. Pliny ben Pliny 8, this man, the son of this man, as a witness. That is the text of the get. Now Halachah Yud Gimel, the Rambam explains. He says, okay, if you write the get in this language and this wording, lo yichtiv, he says how the precision. He should not write vidain, the word vidain, b'yud, with a yud, which actually the way we're even writing it here in the Rambam, it has a yud, that's how it's normally written. Don't write it with a yud. Shem yikra, because maybe the one who's reading is going to read it vidin, judgment claim. In other words, it would sound like, because these are the words that he's saying, V'dein di'avi lechi minai, say this should be for me to you, a bill of divorce. No, it's going to read mishpad yibei nebenach. That's going to be judgment between me and you. What type of judgment? So Rashi actually in Gittin explains where the sources from, that it sounds like that because the judgment is after divorce you. But if there wouldn't be a judgment after divorce you, then you wouldn't be divorced, which obviously would create a whole a problem with the get, because it would sound like as if there's some type of judgment. There is no judgment. So don't write it with a yud, so that you know for sure it's dain and not din. Moreover, don't write when he's writing that it's igras shabukin. Don't write a letter of release with a yud, because maybe one's going to read it v'igart. If you split it up, v'igras v'igart, claim it, that would mean to say imzanis. That if you mazana, because the word noyif isha, the pasuk in Mishlei is translated as man de gir beitza. We see that the Aramaic translation of noyif, of adultery, is actually gart, which would mean that, if you're mazana, then this is divorce, which is not the case. Also, lo yichtav l'mahach b'yud. Don't read for you with a yud, that word, shem yikra kari li mehach, because then you can read it again, to me, from you, which, that from this scroll onwards, you should be to me, which is obviously not the point of the get. And you have to be careful to distance the leg of the hay, which is there on the left side, from the roof of the hay. Because if not, if it gets close, it could look like a ches. It's going to be read as limachach. What that means is like it's a joke. It's not a joke. This is a very serious thing. So you got to be careful when you're writing that word too. And also, b'leicht of tehivyin the sitzbi in b'shnei yudin. Don't write the words that you should be and whatever you desire with two yuds, because shem yikakar, maybe the one who's going to read it, to have yon b'sitzbiyon, not with a chirik, but actually with a kamat, that thou in the plural, that thou shall be and thou shalt desire. It sounds like he's talking to two women, which is not the case because he only has one wife. But he's not really divorcing this one. Two other women. So it's going to be a problem, a flaw in the get. Also, he should lengthen levav de b'chadu. The word b'chadu should be lengthened. Because if you don't, it might look like a yud. The yimashmoy then it's going to sound like it's saying uchedei, and so that kolema, it's going to sound like b'tanai zeh after Isach. That's not with the word of kadu is coming to tell you that with this that I'm going to divorce you. But it sounds like if you're going to read it instead of kadu, you're going to read it as kedei, and that word kedei is going to give the inference of as if it's a stipulation instead of that this is being used. So one has to be careful not to do that, because it can sound like after this stipulation, and there is no stipulation. So again, it would be a misleading statement. One should also lengthen the vav of sareich and shveikin, which is released and divorced, because then that might look like a yud, and the yim mishma terich and shveikin, that would sound like terich and shveikin. Now what's that? That's the feminine. It's as if he's telling her that she's leaving and divorcing him. It's supposed to be, no, he's doing it to her. Sareich and shabukin, not terich and shveikin. So you got to make sure that it's long, a vav, as not as a yod. And since Rambam you got to be careful with all these different ideas in the language and the writing. Again, that it shouldn't sound like two other things. It's got to be clear cut what the writing is and what the intention is. Now, says Rambam. Let's say someone does write in the text we wrote before. He doesn't do like we just said in the previous halacha. It does not lengthen the vavan. So he does not write the extra yuds to make sure that it's not read in the wrong way, like tehevyon b'sitzbiyon. Or let's say he wrote the yuds that should not be written, which we said that you should not write igras with a yud and all that, because it's going to be read igarto, so to speak. Says the Rambam, here's the get puzzle. So if you did those wrong things, it's an invalid get, because the Chum said not to change it, and he did change it, so it's going to be puzzle, and therefore one's not allowed to do that initially to get married with. And same thing applies to like this, same ideas in any language. The puzzle is going to be invalidated. Now the Ravid writes b'shem the Goyin that all these precisions that the Rambam says is only if the husband comes and he contests and he says he wrote the get, and he says, this was my intention, and really this is invalid. Then there's substance of what he's saying. But if, let's say, the husband told the scribe to write it and the scribe wrote it and he just wasn't so precise, then says the Ravid that that's not a problem, that's just a scribal error, and the get is going to be kosher. Now, Lochat Azvav, the Ram continues regarding the fixing or the problems of the writing of the get. Lochat Azvav, get shemachai b'ois. If there's a get that there was a letter that was erased, a table or a word. Now, in that place remains an open space, or they wrote on the erased part. Or they hung a letter or a word between the lines. So it depends. If it's from the standard text of the get, it's kasha because these are standard words. There's no relevancy over here. But if it's from the other part, the primary part, which is where you write whatever you wanted to really write, his name, her name, all these different things, so ain't a get. It's not going to be a valid get because maybe where it was erased, there was some type of stipulation, and he erased it, and he writes a word or a letter instead of that. So let's say it's hanging between the lines, maybe this was added after the witness had already signed. He just added in whatever he wanted to add in afterwards. So therefore, it comes out that signing was not on what he wrote. And obviously we're talking about that, it was not given over in front of Eid Masir, because in front of Eid Masir, so the get would be kasha, Rambam says, because they know what they're seeing. We're concerned for anything later on. We don't go based on what it says in the document, but rather what they saw. But it's no Eid Masir. It's not a get, because we don't know what he's going to tamper with it after it's done. Now, but let's say, before the witness is signed, they wrote that something happened, that something was erased. They write that in the get itself. Shai's plain is tluya that that letter that was there, we added that, we hung it up, we were middle writing and we made a mistake, or it's written on something erased. So then nothing to get. Then even from the primary text of the get, and it's valid just like all of the documentation because they write that in that this is what the witnesses are signing on. Let's say it's a document that was torn crisscross, length and width. That's the way courts tear up documentation. Or is it get puzzles? That's an invalid get. Like all of the documentation, which that's showing from the courts that is void. Now the Rabbit, however, does point out, but if the get was certified by the signatories of the court, then it's not going to be valid because it's only, why would it be torn up? It's obviously was certified that it is good. It's only torn up because that she shouldn't be able to collect her ksuba a second time, which sometimes a woman could collect with the get her ksuba. And maybe actually even the Ram would agree to this point at the Rabbit because this is proving that obviously she got it and there's no other reason why the court was certified. Obviously it's just because she already collected ksuba, and to avoid that they're tearing it up. But if it wasn't certified, that's what I'm saying clearly, and was torn up the way the courts usually do, that's going to be invalid. But if let's say it's torn, but not the way the courts tear it up, so then kasher, it still remains as a valid get with the witnesses, and it just happened to have torn, and therefore it's going to be valid. Halacha design. If let's say the writing has faded, or it's rotted, or let's say it's become like a sieve, meaning it's full of holes like a sieve, so still kosher, of course something happened to the document doesn't invalidate it. Let's say it got rubbed out, or Natasha, it got blurred, but the form of the lettering is still extant, is still there. So if it could be read, it's valid. If not, and again, it's not a get, because again, it cannot be read, it does not have the valid status as lettering. Halacha Zayin says Rambam, when we say this, when she's producing this get with just witnesses signing it, there's no witnesses who have seen it being given over. So it's just based on it, and we can't validate it if the lettering is not valid. Let's say there's witnesses that saw it being given over from him to her, and at that point in time, the lettering were not scrubbed out, were not rubbed out, and it was valid. Even if going back to all the cases we said in the previous halachas, even if the primary text was on the raised part of it, a sheet note between the lines, and they didn't write at the end or that we in the text that this was done. Or even if it was torn crisscross when it's given in front of them, it doesn't make a difference. Even if the whole thing would be on the raised paper, would be valid because when you give in front of them, they see and they verify that this was being done, and nothing was done subsequently, and therefore it's going to be as a valid get. Halacha Yitches, the Rambam now continues on related halacha of the writing of the get when it's done in the communal way. Halacha Yitches, let's say 5 people are wanting to get divorced at the same time, and they write on one get to their 5 wives. So it depends. If they write in an inclusive way, in general, let's say they write in the get, in this day of the week, Gerish plainus, this guy divorced her, this man divorced her, each one is being listed with his wife, that for you this should be, and they write the whole text of the get, and 2 witnesses sign on the bottom. So that's a valid get. And each one should be delivered this communal get with witnesses who see it being given over. Now, the main made the Messiah club, but let's say there's no witnesses who saw the delivery at all. You have to be concerned that maybe each one of these husbands had never given it over to his wife, albeit that we have witnesses signed, but we don't know if it was ever delivered to the wife. So here it depends. Whichever woman actually has the get in her hand that she's producing it, so Megiresha, she's divorced because we know it's a valid get, and she has it, so obviously she was given it. But let's say it was written like this. B'kach b'Shabbos, on this day of the week, Gerish plain l'plainis, this man divorced that woman, Veish Maget, and they write the whole text of the get. And then Mehischel Tachtav Get Acha B'Is Megillah. Now on the same scroll, they write a whole new get. It's essentially each one of the separate gets just happen to be on the same scroll. Because they write, on this day, B'kach b'Shabbos, or on this day of the week, Gerish plain l'plainis, this man divorced that woman, Veish Maget, and then they finish the second get. And also Kol Gittin until they finish all the Gittin, let's say 5 of them on the same scroll, Vein Lamata, and the witnesses on the bottom. So here it depends. In the previous halacha was no matter which one of the 5 women, as long as she has it, she's going to be the one that we're assuming that she was divorced because she has it, and the other ones we don't know, but it doesn't make it which one she is, she's going to be divorced. But here in this case, where it's not just one communal get and the witness sign on the bottom. Here it's a get, going down and down and down, and the witness sign only at the end. So if each one of these women, it's given over to them with witnesses who see it being delivered. So they're all going to be divorced, because even if it wouldn't be Eid Chasim at all, it would be a kosher get just for the Eid Masir itself. And it's not like the problem what's called Mazuyif Mitaycha, where, but yeah, inside there's an intrinsic flaw, because here you can recognize the invalidation. You're not going to come to a line in Eid Chasim because you know that they're only signing at the end, which actually goes on to the next halacha that Rambam says. But if let's say there's no witnesses being given over to the woman, and only one of them, a woman, are producing this get. So if it's the woman that hers was the last get written on that scroll, which it's after her get that the witnesses signed, which is only on the bottom, so she's going to be considered divorced because the Eid Chasim for sure are intending for her get, and the Rambam said before in Parakaf that if you just have Eid Chasim without Eid Masira, even if he gives it from him to her straight, without witnesses, it is going to be valid. So she's going to be divorced. But if let's say the scroll was being produced, she's showing she has it, she's from one of the earlier ones that is written on the scroll, that woman's only going to be in doubt if she's divorced. Because you have to be concerned that maybe the witness who signed only signed on the last get. We don't know if it was going on all the previous gittin, and therefore the early ones are suffik migarashes if they're producing the get. Halacha test. Kasav, let's say this communal get is written like this: Anu, us, plainly, uplaini, him and him and him and him and Girashnu, we're divorcing our wives, and then says all the women, plainness, uplainness, and so on and so forth. They finish writing the whole text of the get. So even if you did it, which would seem the best way, as we said in the previous halachas, each one gets it delivered with witnesses who see being given over, and it gets not going to be valid get. Why not? Because you cannot have 2 women divorced with the same get. Shmuel says in the positive, you have to write it for her, which is it can't be for her and her friend. Which, in contrast to the previous halachas, which there it wasn't one get, it was many getting on the same scroll. So therefore that's different than this case. But here it's the same get, divorcing more than one woman, that's not going to work. Now, but let's say but let's say after that general terminology, it then goes and specifies in the get in the right, plaini gerish plainis, this man divorcing this woman, or plaini gerish plainis, this man divorcing that woman. Bisman plaini, in that date, and that has to be the same date, because if the earlier date is different than the later date, the later one's going to be later, and the earlier ones, and they're signing on the end of the get, comes out that the early ones are going to be get muktim, but as the same date, then all going to be valid, because since each couple is mentioned individually, so that's not considered 2 women being divorced with the same get, because each one's only divorcing his wife, and he's not intending to use the get with his friend's wife. But if it's the men on one side, the woman on the other side, and they're using it, that would be considered below v'chaberta, and that would be possible in contrast to here if each one is specified individually. Now, halacha chaf, the Rambam moves on to the placement of the signing of the witnesses. Kasav shnei gittin b'shnei dapin b'megillah achas. Let's say 2 gittin were written on 2 columns in one scroll. Zebet tzad, this one on one side, and the other one on the side, each one side by side. So, if you have 2 witnesses that are red, meaning they're beneath the one on this column, and you have 2 witnesses on the end of the other get on the other column, it's going to be valid. Each one has 2 sets of witnesses. Anyone that's going to produce it, then she's divorced. Now the other one's not going to be divorced until she has Eid Masira, as Rambam is going to say in the next halacha, because we don't know if she ever received it. But if we know that she has it, she's producing it, then she's divorced. Now halacha chafal. Let's say Hayisham Shneid Muvad, but let's say there were only 2 witnesses, not 2 sets of 2 witnesses, not 4 witnesses. There's only 2 witnesses. Now, there's 2 columns, and each column has a separate get. But boy mitachas get zel mitachas get zel. These only 2 people, not 4 people. There's one pair of witnesses, 2 witnesses, that their signature is coming from beneath one until beneath the other one. So the way, let's say, they would write is Reuven ben Yaakov Eid, like we said, this is this person, the son of this person, witness. So beneath the first get was written Reuven ben, and beneath the second get was written Yaakov Eid. So it's the same signature, but it's going from one beneath the other one. So it says Ram like this: if the woman that the witnesses are being read with her, she's producing the get, meaning the first one, the one on the right, which is that it says over there Reuven ben, because Yaakov Eid is only a continuation of Reuven, that's who he is. Now, because actually, if let's say beneath the first one said Reuven, and beneath the second one actually said Ben Yaakov Eid, actually both of them would be valid for two different reasons. Either because it's like two different witnesses, because you could have Reuven as a person, and yet Ben Yaakov, like they say in Yiddish, Veimen's Biste, that's your name, Ben Yaakov is Eid, or because it's either different people or different signatures, it's the same person but a different way of signing it, so it'd be Reuven and Ben Yaakov Eid. But here we're no, it says Reuven Ben and Yaakov Eid. So the one that says Reuven Ben, the first column, and she's producing the get, okay, she would be divorced. But if the second one, she would produce the get, where the witnesses are not really read with her, because Yaakov Eid is nobody, it's not Ben Yaakov, and it wasn't Yaakov, then the get's not going to be valid. Get until it was given over with witnesses, then you don't need the witnesses signed. It would be with Eid Mesira, and then it would be valid. Halachav Beis. Let's say, again, you have two gittin written on 2 pages. One above the other one. And the witnesses are between the 2 documents. So you have these 2 papers, one on top of the other, and the witnesses are signed in between them. It comes out they're the end of one, but they're above the second one. If they were being produced by the woman who they're signed at the end of hers, it's the paper on top. So she's divorced because it's like a continuation of hers. But the one that it's actually they're signed on top of her get in immigration, so she's not going to be divorced because it has to be that it's the signatures are signed beneath the document how witnesses normally sign. Now, so any witness, forget about this case of 2 documents, witnesses are signed on the top of the page, or the side of the page, or from behind the page, and it's not going to be valid as a get. But if it's given over with witnesses, then kosher, then it's going to be valid, because again, it's not any worse than a get that doesn't have witnesses at all, where it's going to be kosher, and it's not mezuyv metoich, like the first always try to point out with these cases, because if it's mezuyv metoich, it would be invalid, even if you have a kosher get of Veit Mesir, because here everyone recognizes that it's not valid. No one's going to come to rely on the chasima, so therefore, as long as the Eid Mesir is going to be kosher. Halach of Gimel. Hikif, if let's say they attach Rosh Hadaf Hazeh, the top of this page, Rosh Hadaf Hazeh to the top of this page, meaning the top, are like almost side by side, and the witnesses are in the middle. So it would be almost like as if someone started writing a get in the middle of a page, one way, to the right, let's say, and then would start another get in the middle to the other end of the parchment on the other side. And you have the witnesses in the middle. Shenin to Eidim B'Rishon Gittin comes out the witnesses are at the top of the 2 Gittin, so Shenin B'Teil, both are void, because neither one of the Gittin have the Chasima read as the end of that document. But again, if they would be given over with witnesses, again, both would be valid, because you don't even need the witnesses signed inside, and there wouldn't be a problem with because we know that's not valid. Halach of Dalet. Shir Miktzas Get. Let's say part of the get, the document was left open, and they continued writing on the second column, on the second page. Now, and the witnesses signed at the end of the second page, so kasha, it's kasha. But Vahu says Ram, but it has to be recognizable in that scroll that it wasn't cut, not on the top and not on the bottom. For example, let's say you could recognize around the parchment, the edge, that it's thick and black, which you could obviously tell that it wasn't scraped away. And that there was the intention of the scribe. He didn't want to go all the way to the bottom of the page. He likes leaving space. That his intention was to complete it on the second page, and that's where the witness signed at the end of this one get. But let's say not recognizable. You can't tell that if it was cut or not. Even though it was given over with witnesses, we normally would say, okay, they see what's written. No. We doubt if she's divorced. Why? Maybe this was actually 2 different gittin, as we was talking about previously about you could have 2 gittin on the same scroll in 2 different columns. Maybe It was cut off from the first get at the end of the page. The reason was because there was some type of stipulation that they wrote over there. Maybe it was cut off a little bit from the top of the second page, and like that the words should like almost match. Comes out that he's divorcing with a get that's not his. And the witness also didn't sign on his get, only on the second one, because it's the second column is some other man's get. And the Eid Masir is not going to help, because here the second get was not written for this person, unless if the Eid Masir could testify that this was one get from the beginning. But if they can't, they just see the get as it is, we don't know if this was even a valid get, and there was not going to be kosher. Allah chafei. Harisha Kasav get. Someone writes a get. After he finishes Kasav, he writes, Shalu b'shleim plaining. You know, he might as well, you have empty room on the document that's using to divorce his wife. He says, inquire regarding how that person is doing. Oh, shalom alecha pleni rei, or peace unto you, my friend, this person, like he's divorcing his wife in some other town, and he's sending greetings to his friend, or things like that. And then the witnesses sign beneath that greeting, after the PS, they sign on the bottom, and here she's producing this get, or is it something aggressive? It's doubt if she's divorced. You know why? We don't know what the witness is signing. Maybe they're just saying like, oh, they're signing on the greeting, like as if we're also sending regards. Now, but let's say he wrote this and also find out how this person is doing, and it should be peace on you, my friend, or things like that, where since he's using the vav, what's called vav achib, which is connecting with the first statement, it's not an independent statement. Where he's adding on these words onto the words of the get. And it's on both of these that they sign. Again, then she's getting divorced because they're not signing just on this, because this is connected to that, and therefore they're obviously authorizing the whole thing. Now, says Rambam, and if it was given up from the witnesses, again, whether there was a vav or not, either it's going to be kosher, because even if the witness did not sign at all, which we're saying, let's say they only signed on the greeting, wouldn't make a difference. We have the Eid Masira, and that's the primary, and therefore it would be valid as a get.